The night everything changed, I wasn't searching for a miracle. I was just looking for a little warmth. My name is Grace Adler, and on the coldest evening of my life, I found myself standing barefoot in the snow outside my family's front door. Behind the frosted glass, I could see my mother's silhouette hand firm on the deadbolt. "Servants sleep outside," she said. And in that moment, the bitter wind stung a little less than her words. It's strange how a single act can turn the place you once called home into a locked box with no key. I pressed my palm to the door, desperate for forgiveness or maybe just a second chance. But I knew by then that this wasn't about a forgotten chore or a missed midnight snack. This was about my place in a world I didn't choose, a world where love came with conditions and respect was rationed like heat in winter. As the porch light snapped off and darkness settled over me, I wondered for the first time what might happen if I stopped begging to come inside and started searching for an open door somewhere else. Maybe you know the feeling, standing at the edge of everything you thought you needed, suddenly forced to ask yourself, what am I really worth? For years I measured my value in sandwiches made and secrets kept, in the silent hope that one day someone in my family would truly see me. But life has a way of teaching us, sometimes in the harshest ways, that your story doesn't have to end where someone else decides it should. Sometimes the moment you're left out in the cold is really the first step toward finding your own warmth. Tonight I want to share my journey with you, not just the pain of being locked out, but the lessons, the hard-won hope, and the surprising beauty that can come from starting over. You'll hear about choices that terrified me, kindness from strangers, and the way one person's courage can spark a whole new chapter. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, or wondered if you deserved more than the hand you were dealt, this story is for you. So grab a warm drink, settle in, and let's walk together into the heart of a winter night. Because sometimes the only way to find the light is to first step into the darkness. Growing up in the Adler household felt a bit like living behind glass, present, but always slightly out of focus. My stepmother, Marcia, ran the house with an iron will and a list of chores that seemed to multiply every week. My father, Gregory, rarely looked up from his newspaper, nodding only when Blake, my younger half-brother, boasted about his soccer trophies or showed off his newest gadgets. If I got straight A's or won a debate, the praise was brief, polite, quickly redirected toward Blake's endless appetites. I learned early that my role was to smooth things over, make things easier, and stay quiet. There are moments that stick with you long after they're gone. Like the Saturday morning Blake spilled his cereal, eyes wide, waiting for someone else to clean it up. Without a word, Marcia slid the dish towel my way and nodded. Girls are good at tidying, Grace. That's just how it is. There was no room for protest, only silent agreement. It was easier to play along than to fight. As years went by, these small scenes piled up, quietly shaping who I thought I was allowed to be in my own home. Looking back, I realize how many of us grow up believing love has to be earned with service, that our worth is measured by how well we anticipate needs, or how invisible we can make our own. In American families, this golden child and scapegoat dynamic isn't rare. One child is lifted up, the other is quietly asked to make room. I saw it with my friend Leah. Her younger brother always got the last piece of pie. Her mother's attention, her father's gentle encouragement. We joked about it, but the ache was real. The hardest lesson wasn't about chores or responsibility, it was about boundaries. When you're taught to stay silent, to never challenge what's expected, it becomes second nature to ignore your own needs. I started apologizing for things I hadn't done, shrinking myself to keep the peace. The weight of being the peacemaker is heavy, and over time it convinced me I had nothing worth saying. Even my dreams began to feel selfish, as if wanting more was a crime. But dreams have a way of pushing through, even if only in secret, quiet corners of your mind. If I could go back and tell my younger self one thing, it would be, this kindness isn't the same as servitude. You can be loving without erasing yourself. Families at their best are supposed to lift each other up, not assign roles and keep score. If you're listening and recognize yourself here, please know you're not alone. These patterns run deep, but they can be changed. My own story proves that even if you spend years unseen, you can step into the light. The path forward begins with the smallest act, believing you deserve more. As I grew older, I began to sense that something had to give. I watched friends who stood up for themselves, who spoke their truth even when it was hard, and I wondered what that kind of courage might feel like. The tension in my chest grew with each passing year, and so did the realization that my family would never change unless I did. One winter night standing in the snow, I finally understood escaping the shadows sometimes means daring to open your own door even if no one else is waiting on the other side. It's strange how quickly survival instincts can replace fear when you reach your breaking point. That night in the snow, as my toes went numb and my breath turned to mist, something inside me quietly snapped. I had spent years convincing myself that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, maybe my family would finally let me in. But standing there shivering, I realized some doors will never open, no matter how much you knock. I was out of apologies, out of hope, and for the first time out of patience for anyone who thought I was born to serve. Looking up at the dark windows, I remembered every time I'd chosen to swallow my pride instead of speaking up. There were days I'd let Blake take credit for my work at school nights I'd covered for Marcia's mistakes, just to keep the peace. I knew too well the way guilt and love can get tangled, making it feel safer to stay than to go. But now the cold was sharper than any shame, and I knew I had to act. The urge to survive was louder than any old fear of disappointing them. With nowhere else to turn, I broke my own rule and searched for a solution outside the family's expectations. Blake's car was parked at the edge of the driveway, as always unlocked, overflowing with the trappings of his easy life. I crawled inside, pulling on his gym sweatshirt, and wrapping myself in the scent of cologne and privilege. It was the first time I had ever truly taken something for myself, and the guilt was quickly drowned out by a rush of relief. In that moment, I chose myself over tradition, comfort over obedience. Many people, when faced with mistreatment, hesitate to leave not because they lack courage, but because the idea of starting over is terrifying. I thought about friends who stayed in jobs or relationships that slowly drained them, because the pain of the unknown seemed worse than the pain they already knew. We tell ourselves, maybe tomorrow will be better, but sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say, no more, and step into uncertainty. That night, my act of survival wasn't just about escaping the cold. It was about refusing to accept a future that looked just like my past. As I waited for the house to go silent, every nerve in my body hummed with equal parts terror and hope. I realized that courage is rarely loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to move your life forward one small, trembling step at a time. The lesson I learned is that self-preservation is not selfish. In fact, it's the first act of real love we offer ourselves. My decision was made. I was done being a servant, and I was ready, no matter how uncertain the road ahead, to write a new story for myself, starting with my escape into the unknown. Inside Blake's car, surrounded by the remnants of his privilege, I realized that disappearing required more than simply leaving a place. It meant erasing my digital footprints and thinking 2 steps ahead. I drew in shaky breaths and remembered a news story I'd read about a woman escaping an abusive partner using prepaid phones and cash to vanish. Her courage became my blueprint. Using Blake's emergency credit card, I checked into a small motel on the other side of town, careful to use an alias and leave no trace of my real identity. Each action felt both liberating and terrifyingly final. I bought a pay-as-you-go phone, warm clothes, and a sturdy backpack from a 24-hour store, constantly glancing over my shoulder as if Marcia might appear behind a rack of jackets. Every purchase was deliberate. I paid in person, avoided cameras when possible, and kept my hood up. The freedom tasted strange at first, like a new language in my mouth. I used gift cards to buy a cheap laptop and set up a fresh email account, double-checking for any link to my old life. I learned quickly that sometimes safety isn't just about running, it's about staying invisible long enough to start over. In America, there are countless stories of people running from danger, trying to build new lives after abuse or betrayal. I thought of the shelters, the hotlines, and the women's groups I'd read about, online places, offering support for those with nowhere left to turn. I understood then that my situation wasn't unique, and that was oddly comforting. My own escape, while solitary, was part of a larger quiet chorus, people everywhere choosing survival and autonomy over fear. I wished I'd known sooner that resources existed, but necessity made me a fast learner. The hardest part wasn't hiding from my family, it was hiding from the old habits that kept me small. Each time I checked the motel window for familiar faces, I caught a glimpse of someone learning to trust herself. I realized how easy it would be to slip back into old patterns if I let guilt or nostalgia win. but every careful step away from my old life was a step toward freedom. The small victories, like getting a new phone number or booking a bus ticket without second-guessing, felt bigger than any prize I'd ever earned growing up. If there's a lesson in those anxious, lonely hours, it's that preparation is as much about mindset as logistics. Outwitting a controlling family means believing you deserve safety and trusting your instincts enough to build it for yourself. By sunrise, I'd not only disappeared, I'd found the courage to imagine a future where fear didn't make the rules. With the first light creeping through the window, I realized my journey was just beginning. I wasn't just running away. I was finally running toward a life of my own choosing, not knowing what awaited, but finally ready to find out. Arriving in a new city with little more than a backpack, and hope was both exhilarating and overwhelming. My hands shook as I stepped off the bus, clutching the slip of paper with Diane Hansen's address, where I was set to interview for a live-in nanny position. The neighborhood was quiet, and every porch light felt like a promise. I half expected disappointment or even a cruel twist of fate, but Diane greeted me at the door with a genuine smile. "You must be Grace," she said, her voice warm. That single moment made me realize how rarely I'd been welcomed so simply, so openly. Diane's house was full of small, joyful chaos toys scattered across the floor, the scent of cookies in the air, laughter bouncing off the walls. Her 3 children, Sophie, Max, and little Eli, peeked at me from behind a doorway, curious but unafraid. It took me a moment to understand that their mess wasn't a source of shame but a sign of life. Diane didn't ask about my past right away. Instead, she offered me tea and asked how I liked my eggs. The questions were gentle, focused on who I was, not what I'd run from. It felt like breathing fresh air. Those first days I kept waiting for suspicion or strings attached, but Diane's kindness was consistent. She noticed the holes in my shoes, and without fanfare, left a pair of warm boots outside my door. She made space for my quiet, never pushing, never prying. At first I mistrusted her generosity, bracing for the moment it would turn transactional. But slowly her small acts of care softened the armor I'd built. I found myself laughing more, sleeping better, and waking up with a fragile sense of safety I'd never known before. In America, we talk about chosen family, the people who step in when blood relations fail us. Diane and her kids became mine not through grand gestures, but by showing up day after day with kindness and patience. The children asked for stories at bedtime and drew me into their games. Their trust felt like a fragile glowing thread, pulling me back into the world. I realized healing doesn't always come from dramatic change. Sometimes it's woven through the simple rituals of ordinary days. Meals, shared hands, held quiet moments of understanding. The lesson I learned is that trust can be rebuilt, but it takes time and safe people. Kindness, when it's freely given, doesn't just soothe old wounds. It shows us who we can become when we're seen and valued. Diane never tried to fix me. She just let me exist as I was until I believed I deserved it too. As I settled into this new chapter, a gentle hope began to grow. Maybe the past didn't have to define me. Maybe, just maybe, I could write the rest of my story on my own terms. Even as life in Diane's home grew brighter, shadows from my old life sometimes slipped through the cracks. I would catch myself jumping at the sound of my phone, expecting another message from my family, as if their reach could stretch across state lines. Some days the guilt crept in quietly. I wondered if Blake had learned to make his own breakfast, or if Marcia spun new stories for the neighbors. Each message from them, first angry, then pleading, pulled at old wounds. "We forgive you, come home." But it was clear their forgiveness was a tool, not a gift. Control often disguises itself as concern. The mind has a way of replaying old tapes, especially at night. I'd wake from restless dreams, heart pounding my body, bracing for voices I would never hear in this house. Diane noticed, sometimes gently offering tea or a soft blanket without prying. The children with their open laughter reminded me that not all families demand silence. Still, part of me felt stuck between two worlds, one foot in the freedom of my new life, one foot chained to the expectation that I should always go back, always forgive, always serve. Letting go of that pattern was harder than I'd imagined. It helped to learn about others who had escaped unhealthy homes. I joined an online support group, reading stories from people like me, survivors who wrestled with loyalty and fear, shame, and hope. There was Marisol, who'd been pressured by her parents to return only to realize she was needed, not loved. There was James, who forgave too soon and found himself trapped again. Their stories gave me language for what I was living, the push and pull between guilt and growth fear, and the desire for a new start. Healing, I learned, is not a straight line, but a winding path. The biggest mistake I saw and nearly made myself was believing that time alone could fix everything. The truth is, leaving a toxic situation is only the first step. Old patterns follow us until we confront them. I began journaling, and after some hesitation saw a therapist. Slowly, I started to name the beliefs that no longer served me. I could love my family and still choose distance. I could care, but not at the cost of my peace. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't something owed, it's something earned and sometimes withheld for self-preservation. As spring crept into Oregon, I found myself breathing a little easier, watching the children chase sunbeams across the lawn. The memories of my past still visited, but they no longer dictated my days. Diane and the kids, with their unwavering patience, taught me that belonging is something built, not inherited. And as my confidence grew, so did the awareness that I was stronger than any shadow in my past. The next chapter of my journey would test that strength, asking me to choose not just healing, but justice for myself and for others who had never been seen. Courage sometimes arrives quietly, like a steadying hand on your shoulder. As the fog of guilt began to clear, I started to see my past, not just as pain, but as evidence, a story worth telling, not hiding. All those years of cleaning up after others, listening in silence, and fixing computer problems for Blake had given me a peculiar kind of power knowledge. I had saved emails, receipts, and voice memos, snapshots of the secrets my family never thought I'd dare reveal. It's strange to realize that what was meant to keep me obedient could become the very tools of my freedom. One afternoon, after another manipulative message from Marcia, I finally opened the folder I'd built over the years. I read through texts about tax evasion, saw screenshots of questionable side businesses, and winced at the files of Blake's internet misdeeds. My hands trembled as I considered what to do. I remembered stories of whistleblowers, people who risked everything to expose the truth, not out of revenge, but for justice. Their courage gave me perspective. I didn't want to destroy anyone, but I couldn't let fear keep me quiet forever. Some truths, no matter how heavy, must be brought into the light. I knew this decision would shape more than just my own life. Before acting, I reached out for advice, contacting a legal hotline and an advocacy group for survivors of family abuse. Their guidance helped me see that protecting myself and warning others was not only valid but sometimes necessary. I wrote an anonymous report and published the evidence on a blog, careful to scrub anything that could tie it directly to me. I also sent anonymous tips to authorities. In that moment, I felt a surge of relief tinged with apprehension for what would come next. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about drawing a clear line between who I used to be and who I was becoming. For so long, I had believed my silence was a shield. Now I understood that silence can be a cage, locking in not just secrets, but possibility. The lesson I learned was simple, but hard one. The truth can hurt, but it can also set you free. By speaking up, I wasn't just protecting myself. I was honoring every part of me that had survived in the shadows, waiting for a chance to be seen and heard. As the first emails and news stories trickled out, I braced for the storm. But for the first time, I faced the future with a sense of power, not dread. Justice, I realized, doesn't always look like a courtroom drama. It can be the quiet assertion of your own worth. The next days would bring consequences and questions, but I was ready. I had stepped into the light, and now it was time to see what would grow in the warmth of truth. When the truth finally surfaced, it moved faster than I could have imagined. News spread through my old hometown, a local business investigated for financial fraud, whispers about prescription drugs, and a cloud of scandals surrounding Blake's online activities. I followed the stories from afar, heart racing, each time I saw a new headline. At first, the shock almost overwhelmed me. My family, so careful about appearances, was suddenly exposed, no longer able to control the narrative. It was strange to realize that I was safer now than ever before, even as the world I'd escaped began to unravel in the public eye. The consequences landed hard and fast. My father's consulting contracts vanished as clients withdrew, unwilling to be associated with ongoing tax investigations. Marcia lost her nursing license and was called to answer for the prescription pills she'd once sold so casually. Blake, facing charges for his secret photography business, lost not only his job but the fragile web of friends who had always covered for him. In some ways, it felt unreal, like watching a play from the back row, knowing every line before it was spoken. I felt relief, sadness, and a quiet sense of vindication all at once. But justice, I learned, is not always neat or satisfying. I expected a sense of triumph, but what I found was far more complicated. There were moments when guilt nipped at the edges of my relief. Even after all the hurt, a small part of me grieved for what could have been a family that protected, not punished. Still, I knew deep down that consequences were necessary. Without accountability, there can be no healing or change. I read about other survivors who felt the same. Justice doesn't always erase the ache, but it does open a path toward closure. One evening, I received a letter forwarded from my old address, a shaky apology in Marcia's handwriting asking for forgiveness and a chance to rebuild. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of years spent unseen and unheard. The lesson came quietly. Sometimes closure is not about going back, but about moving forward with open eyes and a strong heart. I decided to let the past remain where it belonged. I burned the letter in Diane's fireplace, watching the paper curl and turn to ash. It was my way of choosing peace rather than old patterns of blame and bargaining. Life in Oregon grew gentler as the dust settled. I still checked the news now and then, but less out of fear and more from a sense of completion. The world that had once trapped me no longer held power over my days. Diane and the children cheered me on, celebrating every small victory, each sign that my new life was truly my own. With every sunrise, I felt the grip of the past loosen, replaced by hope for what I might build next. The journey of justice had taught me strength, but the journey of healing, I realized, was just beginning. Healing didn't come with a single revelation, but with 1,000 gentle moments woven through my days. There were quiet mornings at Diane's kitchen table, sunlight streaming in as I helped Sophie braid her hair or listened to Eli's excited stories. At first I was careful with my happiness, afraid it might be temporary, a kindness that could vanish like a summer storm. But kindness, I learned, can be a steady rain. Diane's unwavering support, the children's laughter, and the patience of new friends became the soil where hope began to grow, rooting deeper with each ordinary act of care. Therapy was a step I'd long resisted, convinced that healing meant simply forgetting. But talking through the past, naming the wounds, and learning to forgive myself for not leaving sooner opened up new spaces in my heart. My therapist helped me see that trust isn't a switch, it's a process built one choice at a time. I began to believe that it was safe to open up, to share my story, and to let others meet the real me. The vulnerability was scary, but each positive experience strengthened my resolve to keep reaching out. In time, I found myself building a new family, one not bound by blood, but by mutual respect and genuine care. I joined a local book club, made friends at the community center, and accepted invitations for coffee or hikes, even when old fears whispered that I didn't belong. I saw others who, like me, had survived storms and come through changed. Their stories gave me courage, showing that it's possible to write a new chapter, no matter how broken the old ones felt. We celebrated each other's small victories and learned together that healing thrives in community. If there's a lesson I would share, it's this: self-worth doesn't come from being needed, but from being known and accepted. For so long, I had equated love with sacrifice, thinking my only value was what I could give or endure. Slowly, I learned to say yes to joy, yes to rest, yes to boundaries. I could care for others without losing myself. I could set limits and still be loved. The pain of the past lingered, but it no longer shaped my every decision. Instead, I let hope and self-respect guide the choices I made. As seasons changed, so did I. College classes beckoned, new friendships blossomed, and the world outside Diane's door felt less intimidating. There were still moments of doubt, but now I faced them with curiosity instead of fear. The journey of healing taught me that while scars may never fully fade, they don't have to define what comes next. Looking ahead, I felt ready not just to move forward, but to embrace a future where love was abundant, trust was earned, and belonging was something I could finally call my own. The story wasn't ending, it was just about to begin. Looking back, I see my journey not as a straight line, but as a winding path. Through cold nights, quiet courage, and moments of unexpected kindness. I remember the fear of that snowy evening, the ache of invisibility in my own family, and the trembling hope that led me to choose survival over submission. Each chapter was a lesson about boundaries, about self-worth, about the quiet strength it takes to walk away from what hurts you, even when it's all you've ever known. Through every small step, I discovered the possibility of a life built not on duty, but on dignity and love. Rebuilding wasn't easy. I faced guilt, doubt, and the temptation to return to old roles. But with every sunrise in Oregon, surrounded by laughter and genuine care, I learned what it means to heal. Diane and her children became my chosen family, teaching me that trust is earned, not demanded. Therapy and friendship slowly replaced shame with hope. For the first time, I could dream without fear of college, of new adventures, of a future that belonged to me. Every day was proof that your past doesn't decide your worth, your choices do. Justice, when it came, was bittersweet. The truth set me free, but it also forced me to grieve the family I wished I'd had. Forgiveness became a gift I gave myself, a decision to stop letting pain define my story. My scars didn't disappear, but they stopped holding me back. I learned that standing up for yourself is not about vengeance. It's about honoring every part of you that survived, and refusing to live another day as a servant to fear or regret. The real victory was reclaiming my voice and choosing peace. If you're listening and find yourself in my story, I hope you know you are never as alone as you feel. There is a world beyond locked doors, a place where respect isn't earned by suffering, but given freely like warmth in winter. Don't let anyone convince you your worth is measured by what you endure. You have the right to boundaries, to joy, to rewrite your story no matter how it began. Healing is possible, and it starts with a single brave step toward the light. If this journey touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe, like, and share your own story in the comments below. Let's build a community where every voice is heard and no one is left out in the cold. Your story matters more than you know. Thank you for walking this path with me. The best chapters are yet to come, and I hope you'll be here for everyone.